Hello there, Pursuing Freedom friends. Thank you, as always, for tuning in today. And if it's your first time here, welcome aboard. I'm your host, Erin Bradley, and I'm super excited to have my new friend, Peyton, here, Mike Paton, to be exact. And Mike has a background in EOS implementation, and we're going to unpack what that means. But ultimately, I read a book years ago called Traction that was written by one of Peyton's business partners, managers, bosses. I don't know how you guys define your relationship because I know you've been working together for a long time, but Gino wrote the book Traction, and it was really life-changing for me. And we're going to talk a little bit about why here. But one of the things that we were talking about before we started recording is this underlying concept that process is freedom. And if you've been listening to this podcast for a long time, well, it's called Pursuing Freedom, which is what we're about. So if we're going to find something that's going to unlock the path to freedom today, then I think you're in the right place and you're listening here for a reason, because this message was meant to find you today. So a little more on Mike is that he's got a background of being an EOS implementer, and he's been helping thousands of business owners all over the globe for the past 18 years plus run better businesses and live better lives. So if you've been an avid listener and supporter of Pursuing Freedom, you know exactly why he's with us today. So with no further ado, Peyton, thank you for being with us today. I'm so glad you're here.
Thanks, Aaron. Pleasure to be here. I'm grateful that you're having me.
Well, let's start. Give us a little background. How did you get to where you are today? I know you also co-authored an amazing book called Get a Grip. So bring us up through the backstory and then what you're up to today so we can help our listeners.
I grew up in an entrepreneurial household. My grandparents were teachers. My parents were both entrepreneurs, and spent about a dozen years in banking, much to my father's chagrin, before deciding to take my own entrepreneurial leap. Ran or helped run 4 entrepreneurial businesses before I discovered EOS in 2007. Very quickly fell in love with the simplicity and practicality of what Gino Wickman was sharing with the community of entrepreneurs that I was surrounded by. And so decided to become one of the very first EOS implementers whose name wasn't Gino Wickman, and really fell in love with the work I was doing right out of the gate. That was late 2007. Since then, I've implemented EOS for 160 companies, mostly here in the Twin Cities, Minnesota. And I also spent 5 years running EOS Worldwide as the visionary that succeeded Gino Wickman in that role. Ultimately stepped down in 2020 to go back to full-time EOS implementation because I love being surrounded here in my session room with leadership teams of entrepreneurial companies. And, along the way, Gino and I wrote Get a Grip together. And then I wrote the book Process with my co-author, Lisa Gonzalez, who's actually in Denver, another professional EOS implementer and talented writer herself. So that's my story, and I'm sticking with it.
Well, let's unpack it. So what was it? Let's first of all define EOS for the listeners, and then what excited you about the process and how it even led you to writing a book by that title.
Yeah, EOS stands for the Entrepreneurial Operating System. And that comes from Gino's discovery as a young entrepreneur trying to turn around his family business, that a lot of the business thought leadership that existed in the late 1990s seemed to be written for big corporations. And he was searching for tools and systems and approaches and techniques that really spoke more to the classic entrepreneur. And when you're running a truly small business, you got 3 full-time day jobs in that business, and you're also supposed to be a strategic thinker, a good leader and manager. You're supposed to anticipate when you're going to have capacity problems and proactively hire people, and none of that stuff comes naturally or easily to most entrepreneurs. And so he just built a set of timeless concepts, simple, practical tools that are proven to help the people who own and run entrepreneurial companies get more of the right stuff done every day and free themselves up to play in their unique role in an entrepreneurial company and deliver better life outside of the company. That's what EOS is in a nutshell.
Yes, which is literally everything. Like the whole reason this show exists and all these books exist is because that's everyone's deepest desire, is to have a life powered by a business, right? And it doesn't always turn out that way. So let me ask you a question, because I know in my own personal experience, when I think back to where my business took off, because, years of investing in coaches and books and conferences and just being a learner and then an implementer and all the things. And then finally, like, boom, all of a sudden there's a pop in volume, and I'm suddenly feeling like I'm barely surviving the quote unquote success I've created for myself. And it was really overwhelming for a couple years there, because it just led to this roller coaster of hitting my max capacity, burning out, and as a result, not being able to keep up with all the activities that was bringing the business in to begin with. So inevitably the business slows down, which only
Right.
feeds my fear that this is unsustainable. So then ramp it up again, run out of time and energy, slow down again. So my question is, when do you advise entrepreneurs to invest in the right kind of systems and support that would make it easier to avoid this feast or famine roller coaster that so many entrepreneurs deal with?
6 months ago.
Always 6 months ago.
Yeah. What I would say is it's inevitable if you're trying to grow something, especially from scratch, that along the way you're going to hit multiple ceilings. Okay. And you recounting your story, just there were 6 or 7 different ceilings in there. At first, you're not growing fast enough. And then maybe you're growing fast enough, but you're not making enough money. And then, oh my God, I'm growing and I'm making money. And now I'm overwhelmed. And that's a different ceiling, right? Those are all hitting ceilings. And so when you hit the ceiling, what's important is to remember that what got you here isn't going to get you where you want to go in the future. And you've got to constantly reinvent yourself as a leader of an entrepreneurial company, because the game changes. It's like you can't coach a Major League Baseball team the same way you coach a group of 6-year-old T-ballers, right?
Yeah.
Everything has to change. And so when you're stuck and you can't unstick yourself, it's the right time to consider something like EOS. I mean, we don't believe every entrepreneur on the planet should be running his or her business on EOS. We believe every entrepreneurial company that's going to grow and scale itself beyond multiple ceilings needs to adopt a business operating system that works for that entrepreneur and that leadership team and that company. And we hope EOS is one of the systems that, the people watching and listening will consider. But we do know that you need a system, and you need to rely on a set of tools that everybody in your business is using. So you're all playing by the same set of rules and speaking the same language, and, eliminating the number of things that you have to get on the same page about, to the handful of really critical discussion topics that you should be spending time on. And that's what an operating system brings to an organization.
So what do you do when you're talking with someone who thinks that the words like system and process just sound dull and dreadful and
Yeah.
suffocating?
Well, first of all, I empathize completely, because I've never met a system I didn't think I could make a million times better. And, Gino in the early days was very patient with me, because I'd suggest something different than the way he was teaching EOS. And he said, well, why don't you go try that, Peyton? Let us know when it's worked 27 times in a row. And so far, I'm 0 for like 100 attempts. So I wrote the book Process with Lisa Gonzalez, and the theme of that book, ironically, or coincidentally, is process is freedom. And that comes from a discovery that so many people who founded entrepreneurial companies who are really happy in a fast moving, adaptable, nimble, every day is like a ninja fighting multiple bad guys with swords and nunchucks. So those people revile at the thought of process and says, whoa, whoa, whoa. If I wanted processes and systems, I would have gone to work for a big Fortune 500 company, Peyton. Why are you injecting all this stuff on me? And what I say is, man, if you can't get the basic stuff in your business done the right and best way every day by the 10 or 20 or 40 people that you're relying on to grow and scale this company, and they have to keep coming into your office and asking you the same questions over and over and over again, And that feels like a better way to run your business than having a quick set of guidelines or checklists that everybody follows and all the basics are taken care of. And you're only called upon for your expertise when expertise is truly needed. If that's the way you want to run your business, good luck to you, but you've probably plateaued already. If you want to grow and scale your business, you need to create an extension of yourself and create systems and procedures and processes that get people on the same page and have them executing the way you would if you were in every seat in your organizational chart, or accountability chart is our word for that. And man, when I can make that argument in a compelling fashion, people start nodding their heads and the barriers come down a little bit. Nothing frustrates you more than being asked the same question 5 times a day by 5 different people in your company. It's excruciating. And that's why you don't go on vacation, and that's why you don't sleep enough.
100%. I was trying not to snort with my laughter when you were talking about the ninja, like trying to fight the battles, because it was like, oh, I love this. This is so fun because every day is different and it's total chaos and I'm going nowhere. So no, it wasn't very rewarding.
You know what? And a lot of people fight like that every day and they go somewhere. Like the other thing that's true, and this is why I say I empathize more than I criticize, is it is fun and it is interesting and it does feel stealthy and sort of secretive, and like there's a secret society of people who understand how to be successful in this kind of environment. And so many of my friends and clients, oh, I could never play 2 rounds of golf a week. I mean, they look down, oh, a week-long vacation without checking your email. I mean, I like to work harder than that, Peyton. So I get all of that if you've been successful a certain way, giving all that up for a different way of operating is really hard to do, even if, it's like a chemical dependency.
Yeah,
right?
no doubt. I think I read Traction, gosh, I don't know if it was 2015. I don't know when it was published. If it was it out in 2015?
Oh, yeah. Initially self-published in 2007, early in 2007.
Okay. That makes sense. So I remember reading it, and I've said before that the last 10 years has been what I refer to as the unbecoming, because what you just alluded to, this badge of honor, this measuring our worth with our level of productivity or busyness, and how uncomfortable it can feel as a leader to slow down and to be less busy but more effective. And I would love to hear your perspective as it relates to what I find is the biggest fear people will express when we start talking about systems and hiring support and everything else. And the first thing that comes up is, what's it going to cost me? And I've always said that it doesn't cost you to invest in your business and in your systems. It's costing you not to, because it's costing you your energy, your sanity, your sleep, right? All these things. So how do you address people's fear of investing back in their business when they are at that solopreneur level and they have been for so long? It's all they know.
We actually went right at that in the book process and created a thinking exercise of itemizing all of the costs of not having systems and processes and techniques and tools in place, and all the benefits of having them there. And the list was so exhaustive, it wasn't even funny. Like, I felt guilty about putting it in the book because, so for example, if you've ever hired 3 people in a row for a new position in your company and not one of them ever got great at the job you hired them for, just think of all the time and energy you wasted making a bad hire or doing a bad job of onboarding somebody. So would it be a bad idea to have a hiring process and an onboarding process that reduces the chances that you're going to have to fill the same position in your organization multiple times? And so those were the kinds of things we tried to point out. If you've ever lost an opportunity to successfully complete a transaction for a client because they were unhappy with the way things were being handled in the early stages of the engagement, what was it worth to you to have saved that client because that didn't, and if you start thinking about the benefits of spending the money. And when you're talking about systems and people that can help you, you think about it in an ROI mindset, a return on investment mindset, rather than the cost. You get to the point very quickly where there's a huge return on investment. And then the thing I'll talk about with a client who's really struggling with this is I'll say to the owner, hey, how much do you think you're worth an hour when you're working in your gift, when you're doing the thing that you're an expert at? There's nobody in your organization or maybe in the industry that's as good or better than you at this thing. How much do you think you're worth an hour? And I've heard numbers ranging from $200 to $2,000, but I've never heard a number lower than $200. And I'll say, make me a list of all the stuff you're doing that you could hire a good administrative assistant to do for 25 to $35 an hour. Okay. And it's booking travel and managing my calendar and deleting spam emails from my email inbox and blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, how many hours a week do you spend doing that? And it usually ends up being about 10 hours. Okay. Sometimes more, sometimes it's 20, sometimes it's 30. There's an amazing number of people who love managing their own travel. Right. And I say, so if you're worth $200 an hour when you're working in your sweet spot, and you could hire somebody else to do it for, let's just gross it up, for $40 an hour, you're costing your company $160 an hour for 10 hours a week. That's $1,600. How much is this person going to cost? We have to change the thinking. You know, all the work I do is just reprogramming the mindset so that we're open to a different way of doing things tomorrow than we were doing it yesterday. And this is inevitable when a business grows. And I use sports analogies way too much, and I apologize a lot for it. But again, as you're competing against stiffer competition, when the company grows and scales, you have to change the way the team and your coaching staff and everybody operates. And so, you know, you can't be a little league coach competing in the major leagues. You need a whole team of people who one's responsible for batting, and one's responsible for just the catchers, and one's responsible for making sure the equipment is loaded on the team bus. And I mean, it just, these things change. And so for somebody to say, no, what got me here is going to get me there, it just doesn't make any sense if you're trying to grow and scale your business. If you're happy running a $250,000 a year, $1 million a year, or $10 million a year business, and you want to stop there, keep doing it the way you're doing it. But if you want to get bigger and keep making money, maybe improve profitability, you got to change the way things work.
It's interesting too, because what you said, like, if I want to just keep doing what I've always done and I'll just stay stuck. But the truth of the matter is, I've seen it time and again, and especially with myself, we're not all interested in the same things 10 years later. Like things that were challenging to me 10 years ago that were kind of fun and kind of interesting. Like now I've achieved mastery and I'm kind of bored. And then the boredom leads to burnout. And then that leads to not being in the mood to do the things. And then your business bottlenecks. So I am curious though, because I've gotten some pushback on this, and I'm curious what your perspective is on it. Like I asked you earlier, like when's the right time to hire? And it's like 6 months ago, but I've had people say, you know, everybody needs to get in and do everything themselves so they know how to do all those things. And I've seen it go both ways, where certain organizations, let's just talk about the real estate space that a lot of our audience is in, whether you're a real estate agent, a mortgage lender, whatever. And I've seen where a loan officer, for example, whose primary role is to do business development, right? But a lot of loan officers, they bring in the business. They also pre-approve every client. They price every loan. They know all the guidelines. They basically know how to underwrite. They put together a perfect file. They collect all the documents. So all the things, right? And there are certain companies today that will bring on the loan officer and give them the skills they need to go bring in more business and instantly plug them into a loan partner or a loan officer assistant. That's their business model. They instantly plug them into marketing support. They instantly plug them into all these different departments that can help them operate like a true professional right out of the gates. Same thing on the real estate side. You can come into a company and they've got transaction management, they've got marketing, they've got social media, they've got a videographer, right? So they're giving you all the resources to go do what only you can do, which is go bring in the business and love on your clients. And I think that's a brilliant model. I think it's brilliant to have the pieces in place to allow the person to shine. And I've gotten pushback that some people feel like you've got to go out there and earn your stripes and do all the things before you've earned the right to have support in your business. So I'm curious what your perspective is there.
Yeah, I get that argument. I really do. And I do think you're a better business partner to all those support mechanisms, the broader your knowledge of the entire process is. So I'd probably land somewhere about 80% of the way on that spectrum to you got to do it all yourself for 18 years and be miserable and your family hates you and blah blah blah, and then you can start letting go of little teeny pieces, right? That's one end of the spectrum. To come in and all you need to know how to do is cold call, develop an initial relationship, go to the first appointment and secure a listing or a sale or a commitment for a mortgage loan or whatever, right? So I would probably go towards that model about 80% of the way, but not all the way, because I do think the delegator needs to understand the task at hand and the context of the work being done. Otherwise, those people tend to poo-poo the value of getting their part of the job right for all the other components of the process. And your listeners are probably familiar with CRM applications not serving the appropriate purpose because the way data is being entered into the system is crazy around the various organizations. And so I do think everybody kind of needs to understand the way the puzzle pieces play together in those more complex organizations. And there's probably a premium on management at those larger organizations with various departments playing some part in the whole transaction. So it just changes where the workload goes, but it is important to understand it all for what it's worth.
I am curious too around this evolution of a human, because if you've ever read the E-Myth by Michael Gerber, and I know in EOS and Traction, we talk about you need to have a visionary who's your, the captain of the ship, directing, charting the course, troubleshooting which way we're going to go from here once we face an obstacle, whatever. And then we've got the integrator, and all the other players are all rowing in the same direction. So we're moving the ship with more velocity. And in the E-Myth, he talks about, the entrepreneur, the manager, and the technician. And when I think about what it looks like to take the leap of faith, become 100% commissioned, self-employed in whatever arena you're in, you're wearing all those hats. You are the entrepreneur, you're the manager, you're the technician. So once you've become a great technician and you're ready to basically promote yourself within your own business, do you think that everyone has the ability to develop the leadership skills? Because perhaps someone's listening and their biggest fear is, how can I even manage people? Can I be a good leader? And I'm curious if you ever work with people where you're like, you know what, your DNA is to be the integrator, not the visionary.
I was going to say that when this subject first came up, there are only a handful of people on the planet who, are naturally born for each of those roles, right? And so technician might be your favorite thing to do. And there is no harm in that. People who, I had a guy who was in charge of a sales team once, and he took on a project to implement a CRM system, and he killed it, just killed it. And after about 3 quarters, he comes to the session and he threw himself on the issues list. And he said, I'm the issue because I manage a group of salespeople, and I've come to the conclusion that I'm good at and love managing things that don't talk, but I'm terrible at managing things that do talk. And so I shouldn't be in my position. Give me projects to do, right? And so that's just evolution, right? Getting to know yourself. I mean, when I first started reading Traction myself and was an early stage EOS implementer, because I've always been an achievement-oriented person and I've always strived to outperform the people that were working alongside me, I always wanted to be the best at everything. I felt like I was an integrator because I got things done and I achieved results consistently. It's what Gerber would have called the manager role. But when I said that to Gino Wickman, he just laughed for like 15 minutes. It was really uncomfortable. Like, Peyton, you're a visionary. And he might have sworn a little bit when he said that. right? And so you just have to discover who you really are, and you don't know. And that's part of the cool thing about being an entrepreneur, right? When you start, it's just you on a bicycle, right? And then one day you wake up and you own a minivan and you got 11 people in it and you're driving the minivan and you hate your minivan and you hate the people in the back of the minivan, and you don't know whether you were born to drive vehicles or ride bikes, but you start wishing you were still riding the bike because those people are driving you crazy. And so it's a journey of discovery, and it changes over time. I've seen people who are really good at running the day-to-day of an organization become great visionaries. I've seen people who are great at running the day-to-day in a business that don't want to have anything to do with the visionary role. They just want to run a business. And when the company outgrows them, they go find another business to be the integrator of. And so you just have to figure out what your natural role is and feel comfortable going to do that, and try and do it in a place where you love your life every day and you get paid fairly for the value you're contributing to the business. And most of my clients will say if they do that, the money takes care of itself. It's when you're trying to add value in a way that isn't in your sweet spot where things get really hard.
Yeah, I love that. And I'm glad that we touched upon that, because I feel like it's important to validate that somebody listening might be thinking that may not be the path for me to be a leader of a team, and that's okay.
Well, I mean, the number one common mistake in growing a sales organization is to promote your most effective individual salesperson into a management role, because the disciplines required to be really good at the sales role are often completely different than the disciplines required to be really good at the driving sales role.
Well, actually, it's funny because there was a moment in my journey of moving from technician to manager to leader where I was releasing some of those hats, that I am so futuristic in my vision that I often want to promote people at the moment they became so comfortable, because I'm seeing their vision for themselves and they're like, I'm comfortable. I love being an integrator. And I'm like, but you could be doing this and you could be doing that.
Yeah, very common for visionary types to see more potential in the people that work for them than those people see in themselves. A great visionary quotation, I'm guilty of having said it many, many times myself, is I am really good at managing people who don't need to be managed.
Oh,
That's like not a thing.
yeah.
So basically you're good at watching talented people work. So is everybody else. Look at a stadium filled with 80,000 people when the Broncos are playing in a couple of weeks. And they're all really good at managing people who don't need to be managed, because that's what they're all doing. They're yelling at the quarterback for throwing to the wrong receiver.
That is awesome.
So yeah, this, and again, I'm saying all this with coming from a place of empathy and humility. The truth is most people who start and grow successful entrepreneurial companies are so talented and so busy, they don't have time to slow down and think about these things. And it's just like next item on the task list up. And so just finding the time to talk to somebody about what you're really put on the planet to do can be really hard for most of the people watching and listening. And so, my passionate plea to those people is, take a deep breath, give yourself a couple hours to just do some thinking and think about some of these concepts, and maybe imagine a future that isn't as hectic and ninja filled as the present.
If someone's listening and you're speaking straight to their soul and they're like, I needed to hear this, I know what I need to do, where do I begin? Like, whether it's contacting you or the company, or which book should they start with first? Like, where do they begin to really start to go deeper with this?
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy with people reaching directly out to me. I know we'll get all that stuff in your show notes. But the best resource to learn a little bit more about what EOS is and how it works is eosworldwide.com. Way back in the early days, Gino and his business partner, Don Tinney, and we built this site to be a one-stop shop for people who are curious about whether EOS could bring value to their lives and their businesses. And so it's a great place to do initial research. And then anybody who just wants to have a conversation, shoot, if you just want to put a beer in your hand and talk to somebody else who's been where you've been, just give me advance warning and let's set an appointment so I have a beer in my hand as well. And, I'm happy to help. I love helping entrepreneurs get what they want and deserve from their businesses.
Yeah. And I want to highlight too for the listeners is that when I learned of EOS and through many different communities and masterminds I'm a part of, I've seen it work for business owners at every level. So conceptually and logistically speaking, I've seen ways to implement concepts that are taught in EOS, in traction, in process, all the things that you can apply immediately. So don't hear this episode and think, well, I'm just not there yet and it's not for me. Think, where can I start learning about this? Because chances are you're going to find at least one actionable strategy that's going to change your life and business forever, because it did for me. And that's why it's such a gift to have you here with us today, Peyton. I really, really appreciate you taking time out of your schedule to join us, because it's so much better to hear it from the pro than having me regurgitating every book I've ever read that changed my life and overwhelm my listeners that way.
Well, I'm happy that we made the list, Aaron, and it was a great conversation. And again, I urge the people who are intrigued to reach out. I'm happy to help further.
I'm just sorry you didn't warn me to have a beer in my hand before we started recording.
Let's do another episode someday. We'll knock that one off the list.
I love it. Okay, so besides EOSworldwide.com, then how else can folks, are you on LinkedIn? Are you on Instagram?
Yeah, I'm on all the social channels, and my website is MikePaton.com, MikePaton.com. Also featured on the EOS Worldwide website as well.
Thank you so much. I really, really do appreciate this.
My pleasure. Have a great day.
And to all my listeners out there, thank you as always for tuning in. If you had one takeaway, share this with someone who needs it. Share this episode. Send Mike Paton a message online. Send me a message, because we put this content out there in the ether and we hope that it's bringing some value to you. As always, I love you. I appreciate you, and we'll see you next time.